"Mama can't walk no more, mister," said the girl, dragging a basket by the tracks the train had screamed through before dawn, leaving behind only heat and stillness. Dust hovered in the air, kicked up by the wind, then settled again like ash. The tracks glinted under the sun. Empty, endless. And there she was, a girl no taller than a fence post, dragging a wicker basket across the gravel like it weighed more than she did. Her knees were scraped. Her braid had come loose. One hand gripped the basket handle, the other trembled by her side. She limped, dragging her bare foot over the rocks, her eyes too steady for someone that small. Inside the basket, nestled among rags and a thin quilt, lay a woman. Gaunt, motionless, her face blotched red with fever, her lips cracked, her chest barely rising. A Bible was clutched to her chest like a life preserver. The stranger stepped out from the shade of a telegraph post, broad shoulders, hat low over his eyes. Duster coat dulled by dust and time. He said nothing, just crouched low beside the girl. She didn't flinch, just looked up with a face too hollow for seven, and said, "Mama can't walk no more, mister." Her voice cracked on the last word, but she didn't cry. Not yet. He looked from her to the basket, then back to her. No train coming, no help in sight. Only sky, dust, and a child whose world had narrowed to this one question. Would someone stop? He didn't speak, just reached down and gripped the side of the basket. She let go slowly, like she wasn't sure if trusting him meant losing her. But he lifted it all the same. And when he turned to walk, she followed, without being asked, without hesitation. Just barefoot steps beside a stranger. He didn't wear a badge, didn't ride a horse, just walked the rails because the roads behind him were spent and the ones ahead didn't ask questions. His name hadn't been spoken in weeks, not by anyone who meant it. He carried no map, only the weight of not belonging. A sack of jerky, a flint and knife, a bedroll tied tight. His boots were cracked, the soles thin as a prayer. Dust clung to his collar, same as it did the memories he hadn't shaken since leaving Shiloh Ridge behind. He knelt in the gravel, eyes level with hers. "Where were you headed?" She blinked. Once, twice. Then shook her head slow. "Been walking since Fort Briar," she whispered. "Mama said we'd find help, but then she got tired. Then she got real hot. She ain't eat in days." The basket creaked beside her. Her mother's breath was shallow, wet. The sun glared down like it meant to finish what hunger had started. The man nodded once. Not like he understood, but like he'd heard that kind of truth before. The kind that didn't need fixing, just carrying. He didn't ask why they left. Didn't ask who they were running from or where the rest of the family had gone. There were questions too cruel to make a child answer. He stood, shifted the weight of the basket in his arms. "Where are we going?" the girl asked, one hand on his coat. He looked down the tracks. The horizon shimmered. "Someplace with shade," he said, "and water." Then he started walking again, slow and steady, and she followed, because he hadn't asked her to, and that made all the difference. The road curved away from the tracks and into the scrub, where cottonwoods leaned and cicadas whined in the heat. He didn't talk, just walked, boots quiet over dry earth, the basket in his arms like it weighed nothing. The girl stayed close, her fingers curled into the fabric of his coat like it was the only thing in the world that wouldn't let go. The sun dipped low. Shadows stretched thin. Up ahead, a cabin came into view, slouched and forgotten, half swallowed by brush. One shutter hung loose. The porch tilted east, but the door still held on its hinges. He pushed it open with a boot, the wood groaning like it remembered company. Inside was dust and old smoke, but no rot, no snakes, just silence. He laid the basket down on a cot that sagged in the middle, careful not to jar her. The woman didn't wake, but her lips moved, maybe a prayer, maybe just breath. He didn't ask. The girl sat cross-legged on the floor, watching. Her eyes darted like a rabbit's, but her hands stayed still. He lit the stove with dry bark and flint, stirred the embers until they glowed. Heat crept into the room, slow and steady. From his pack, he pulled a can of beans and a tin cup, heated both, split them in half, gave the girl the cup. She drank like it hurt to be grateful out loud, then curled up near the stove, arms around her knees. The man sat nearby, didn't eat, didn't sleep, just watched the fire catch hold of the dark. Outside, the world was still cruel, but inside, just for that night, there was warmth, a cot, a stove, a door that still opened when you knocked. The wind scratched at the cabin walls like a dog left out too long. Inside, the woman tossed beneath a patchy quilt, sweat shining on her brow. Her lips moved without sound, eyes fluttering under lids like they were watching something far off and awful. Fever dreams clung to her tighter than the blankets. The man knelt beside her, steady hands lifting her head just enough to spoon in sips of broth. Most of it dribbled down her chin. Still, he kept trying, patience like stone. The girl didn't sleep. She sat curled by the fire, arms wrapped around her knees, whispering words that had no beginning or end. Half a hymn, half a lullaby, handed down from a mother who once sang it stronger. Her voice cracked, but she never stopped. When the fire dimmed, the man pulled a can from his pack. Not much left in it, just 2 soft wedges of peach floating in syrup. He didn't say anything, just handed it to the girl with the quiet care of someone offering gold. She took the spoon like it might disappear if she blinked, brought it to her lips, sweet, cold, the kind of taste that didn't belong in a place with cracked walls and sickness in the air. She swallowed once, then again, then started to cry. Not loud, not messy, just slow tears down dirty cheeks, like something inside her remembered what kindness felt like and didn't know what to do with it. The man didn't speak. He just added more wood to the fire, tucked the blanket tighter around the mother, and sat back down against the wall, watching. The girl ate the rest with shaking hands. Outside, the wind kept clawing, but inside, the peaches were real. She didn't trust easy, didn't smile either, not even when the fire warmed her feet or when the man gave her the bigger half of the biscuit he cooked on the stove's edge. Her eyes moved like a coyote's, fast, smart, always checking the door. She didn't sit on the cot. She curled beside it, back to the wall, one arm always touching the leg of the bed where her mother lay, breathing shallow and slow. The man didn't ask much. He wasn't the kind to fill silence just to feel heard, but once, while he ladled water from the bucket into a tin cup, he asked, soft and even, "What do they call you?" She didn't blink, just said, "Mama's girl." And that was that. She wouldn't say where she came from, wouldn't say what they were running from. Just watched with those eyes too old for her face and spoke only when needed, like words cost more than food. The man nodded once and handed her the cup. Later, when she reached for more wood to feed the fire, he said, "Careful, Peach." She looked up, surprised. "Ain't my name." "I know," he said, turning back to the stove. "Fits anyway." She didn't argue, just looked at him for a long beat, then added the log to the flames like it was her idea. After that, he kept calling her Peach, and after a while, she stopped correcting him. She still didn't smile, still flinched when wind slammed the shutters, or her mother moaned too loud in sleep. But when the man handed her the last bite of cornbread that night, she whispered, "Thank you, mister," then curled up near the fire, one hand resting near her mother's foot, and slept without speaking her real name. The days folded into each other, slow and quiet. No visitors, no news, just wind through the trees and the steady breath of a cabin still learning how to be lived in again. He worked without saying much, hauled water from the creek in buckets patched with wire, chopped wood in clean, sharp swings that echoed through the brush, lit the stove each morning before the frost could creep too far in. He moved like he'd done it 100 times for no one in particular. Peach watched him through the cracked window, chin on the sill, arms folded like she might bolt if he gave her reason. But he never did. The mother slept, drifting in and out of fever. Some days she opened her eyes and whispered something about God or Kansas. Other days she just moaned. The man checked her pulse without flinching. They didn't eat much, cornmeal beans. Once, a strip of squirrel he caught and salted himself. But it wasn't the food that kept the girl from fading. It was the fire. It stayed lit. Even when the wind howled and the shutters banged like fists. even when the roof leaked and they had to set out pans to catch the drips, even when Peach woke crying and couldn't say why. He'd already be up, adding a log, stirring the coals, steady as a church bell. She never asked why he stayed. Maybe she thought he'd disappear if she did, but one morning, after he handed her a tin cup of boiled water and turned back toward the door, she followed him out to the porch. Didn't say a word, just sat beside his boots on the step, watching the light spread across the trees. The fire burned slow behind them, but it burned. Morning came slow, wrapped in fog and wood smoke. The fire had burned low, but not out. Peach was curled beneath two quilts, her hand on the edge of the cot, fingers just brushing her mama's. Then a sound, not wind, not the creak of the porch. A breath, drawn sharp. Then a whisper. "Where?" Peach bolted upright, hair tangled, eyes wide. "Mama." The woman's eyes blinked open, filmy and lost at first, then clear enough to see her daughter's face. She reached up, weak as a whisper, and Peach fell into her arms with a cry that broke something tight in the room. The man stood back, near the stove. He didn't move, didn't speak, just waited like he always had, quiet, steady, out of the way. The mother stroked Peach's braid, her hand trembling. "You carried me all this way, baby?" Peach shook her head and pointed. The woman looked over, following her daughter's gaze. The man tipped his hat a little. Nothing more. She tried to sit up, winced, then let her hand fall into his. Rough, calloused, warm. "You saved us," she whispered, tears tracking down her cheeks. He didn't answer, just held her hand until her fingers stopped shaking. Peach watched them both. She didn't speak, didn't blink, just kept that hand on her mama's blanket, like she was anchoring the world in place. The woman lay back, breathing steadier now, and the man, still silent, crossed the room to stoke the fire again. Because sometimes it wasn't words that pulled people back from the edge. It was warmth, and someone still there when the eyes finally opened. He didn't tell her to come, just grabbed his coat, slung his satchel over one shoulder and stepped off the porch. But before he reached the fence, he heard the thump of boots behind him, too big, too loud, dragging in the dirt like they didn't quite belong to the girl wearing them. Peach. She'd found a pair near the wood pile, cracked leather with laces missing, stuffed with scraps of cloth to keep from falling off. They flopped when she walked, but she walked proud anyway. He looked back once. She didn't ask. He didn't stop her. They made it to the edge of town by noon, dust curling around their heels. The sun beat down hard, but neither of them flinched. One tall shadow, one small, moving side by side. People stared. A shopkeeper paused, sweeping. A woman with a parasol frowned behind her lace veil. A man leaning on a crate muttered something about beggars and orphans. Peach didn't look at them, just squared her shoulders and stayed at the man's side like he'd told her to. But he hadn't. He walked slower than usual, letting her match him. Bought flour, salt, a sack of oats, said little. Paid in coin he didn't seem to mind parting with. She carried the oats herself, arms straining. "Too heavy?" he asked, not looking. "Nope," she said, chin high. He nodded once, almost smiling. They passed the saloon last. The piano stopped. Laughter died down, but he didn't glance sideways. And Peach, boots flapping, arms full, kept walking. Because sometimes all a girl needed to feel taller was a pair of too big boots and a man who never once told her to let go. The general store was warm inside, thick with tobacco and flour dust. Shelves leaned with canned goods and bulk cloth. Behind the counter stood a man with sleeves rolled and chin lifted like he was tired of saying no. The blanket sat folded on the top shelf. Wool, gray, clean. Peach stared at it like it was made of heaven. The man stepped forward, quiet as ever, and set a knife on the counter. Bone handle, clean blade. Well kept. The storekeeper glanced down, then shook his head. "Ain't taking tools today. Need coin." The man didn't argue, just stood there, steady as stone. Peach stepped up beside him, boots scuffed and slipping. "It's all we got," she said, voice firm but small. She lifted the edge of her coat and showed her feet. Red, raw, the skin cracked at the toes. The storekeeper's eyes flicked down, then away. "Sorry, miss. Rules are rules." The man looked at the knife once, then back at the blanket, Then, without a word, he slipped off his coat. Duster worn thin at the collar, lined with flannel, smelled of fire and cedar. He folded it slow, laid it on the counter. "Take that," he said, "for the blanket and the girl's boots." The storekeeper hesitated, then nodded. "Done." Peach didn't say anything. She just clutched the blanket tight to her chest when it was handed down to her, like it was something more than warm, like it was proof. Outside, wind whipped through the gaps in her coat, but her arms were full, and he walked beside her in just a flannel shirt, shoulders high, eyes forward. He didn't look cold, and Peach didn't feel it. Some things cost more than coin. Some things are worth it. They were leaning against the porch rails outside the saloon, boots propped, whiskey grins stretched too wide. Dust swirled at their heels, but they didn't blink, just watched. Peach walked close to the man's side, one hand fisted in her new blanket, the other swinging free like she was trying to walk bigger than she felt. Her boots still slipped at the heel, but she didn't trip, not once. One of the men, yellow teeth, silver belt buckle, the kind who smiled without kindness, tilted his hat back and gave a low whistle. "Ain't she a sweet little mule? Bet she sings too." The others laughed, rough, quick, like coyotes circling something small. The man didn't stop walking, not at first. Then he did. Turned slow, like he'd forgotten something behind him. Peach froze, breath caught in her throat. The sun sat low behind them, casting long shadows across the dirt. He faced them full. No words, just eyes, dark, still, unmoved. The kind of stare that didn't blink, didn't flinch, just waited. The laughing stopped. The man with the silver buckle shifted his feet, cleared his throat like maybe the dust had gotten to him. Another scratched his neck, suddenly interested in the shape of his boots. No one spoke. They looked away first, one by one. The man turned back, silent as before, and kept walking. Peach's hand found his again without thinking. She didn't say thank you. He didn't ask her to, but she walked closer after that, like maybe the space beside him was the safest place left on Earth. The wind came hard that night, thudding against the cabin like it meant to peel the boards apart. The fire held, but the walls moaned. Outside, trees bent low. Inside, quilts were pulled tight, and the air smelled of pine ash and damp wool. Peach had fallen asleep with her head on her mama's leg, breath soft, hands curled. The man sat nearby, mending a broken strap with thick thread and steady fingers. Then came a voice, barely above a whisper. "I lost him in a fire." The man didn't look up. She wasn't talking to him, not exactly, just letting the words free before they turned to stone inside her. He ran back in for the cradle. There wasn't no baby yet, just hope, burned to nothing before the sun came up. The room stayed quiet. The thread kept pulling. I buried him with my ring, kept moving after that, from Denton to Briar and then farther. Always thought if I kept walking, the grief'd stay behind. But it don't. It rides your back, like hunger. Her voice cracked, dry from days of silence. Folks shut their doors, said they couldn't feed another mouth. One preacher said he'd take my girl in, separate, said the Lord would understand. She laughed then, low and bitter. I said no, took my baby and walked. The wind slammed the shutters again. The man stood and checked the latch. The woman looked at him, eyes tired but clear. Most men ask what a woman can offer. You didn't ask a thing. He didn't answer, just stirred the fire once more, and for the first time since he found them, she slept without shivering, because some stories once spoken take the weight with them. The morning frost clung to the edges of the grass, turning the world brittle and pale. The man stepped out to fetch water, breath curling in front of him when he heard the thunk, wood on wood, uneven and wrong. He followed the sound around the side of the cabin and found her there. Peach, bundled in her too big coat, boots dragging the axe behind her like a reluctant dog on a leash. She'd already knocked over the kindling pile, and a chunk of bark sat split in a crooked wedge like it had been chewed by teeth instead of steel. She looked up, cheeks red from the cold. "It's heavy," she muttered, "but I want to help." He didn't smile, didn't shake his head or take it from her hands, just knelt beside her and adjusted her grip, one hand firm near the end, one hand high for control. "Like this," he said. His voice was low but not scolding. She nodded, swallowed hard, and tried again. The blade struck true this time, not deep, but clean. The wood cracked. Her eyes lit up, but she didn't look at him for praise, just lined up another piece and kept swinging. He stood back, arms folded, watching as she found her rhythm, slow, determined, all grit and no fear. From the porch, the mother watched too, blanket around her shoulders, a look on her face like maybe the sun had risen after all. The axe was still too heavy, but the girl didn't stop, and the man didn't take it away. Because sometimes a child doesn't want rescue. Sometimes she just wants to be shown how to stand. The soup was thin, mostly broth with a few soft beans and a sliver of salt pork, but it warmed the cabin and filled the air with something close to comfort. Peach stood on a stool near the stove, sleeves rolled, wooden spoon in hand, stirring slow like he'd shown her. Her braid hung loose over one shoulder, and her face was smudged with flour from earlier, where she'd tried to knead biscuits that didn't rise, but she stirred like it mattered. "Mama taught me my letters," she said suddenly, eyes on the pot. "Want to hear?" He didn't answer, just gave a short nod from where he sat near the fire, sharpening the same knife he'd once tried to trade for a blanket. Peach cleared her throat like she was stepping on stage. A is for apple, B is for bread. She worked her way down, voice growing more certain with each letter. When she reached Q, she grinned. "I made a rhyme for that one." He paused his sharpening. "Q is for quilt, stitched in the cold, keeps mamas warm and cowboys bold." She looked over her shoulder, eyes shining, waiting. He didn't speak, didn't clap, but something shifted. His mouth twitched, just a little. A corner lifted, barely there, but it was a smile. Crooked, tired, real. Peach blinked, then smiled back, wide, proud, like she won something no one else had ever gotten. He went back to his knife. She went back to her soup. Nothing more needed saying. Sometimes a rhyme ain't worth much, but sometimes it's enough to make a quiet man remember how to grin. The sky bruised into dusk, blue folding into ash. Supper was quiet, just stew and cornbread, soft chewing, and the pop of firewood. The mother, stronger now, sat up on the cot, a quilt across her knees. Her voice came soft, like it was still getting used to being heard again. "We'll go in the morning." The man didn't lift his eyes from the bowl in his hands, just nodded once, slow. Peach froze, spoon halfway to her mouth. Her eyes flicked from the fire to her mama, then to the man beside her. She set her bowl down, careful not to spill, and stood. She crossed to him, small hand tugging the edge of his sleeve. "Can we stay, mister?" He looked down, met her eyes, that same old stillness in him, but something cracked under it now, something softer. "Just till the frost melts," she added, like she knew better than to ask for more than time. The man didn't speak, didn't nod, didn't shake his head, just reached for his coat, stood, and stepped out into the cold. Peach watched from the window as he crossed the yard toward the woodpile. The axe swung steady, rhythm sharp. Sparks flew from the block as logs split clean. He chopped until the stars came out. When he came back in, arms full of wood, he didn't say anything, just stacked it neat beside the stove. The mother didn't press him. She just looked down at her girl, then back at the man, eyes wet. That night, the fire burned hotter. The quilts felt heavier. And for the first time since the basket by the tracks, Peach didn't sleep with her boots on. Some answers don't come in words. Sometimes they're stacked by the hearth. The sun had started to melt the frost in patches, leaving the ground soft and muddy in the morning, hard again by dusk. Birds sang more often. Smoke rose from the chimney, slower, more like habit than need. The cabin breathed different now, like it knew it was being lived in. Peach found the carving knife in a drawer by the stove. She turned it over in her hand, thumb brushing the hilt, then stepped to the doorframe and pressed its point into the wood. She worked slow, careful. When she stepped back, 3 letters stared back at her, rough, crooked, but clear. PMS. "Mama says letters ought to mean something," she said. That's Peach, Mama, stranger. The man stood behind her, watching. He didn't correct her, just walked over, held out the knife again. Then finish the job, he said. She looked up, brows pinched. What's your name, mister? He hesitated, first time she'd asked. Calder, he said, voice low like it still wasn't used to being spoken. She turned back to the wood and scratched it in beside the others. Took her time spelling it right, then stepped back again and crossed her arms like she was guarding a treasure. There, she said. Now we're a house. The mother stood in the doorway behind them, blanket wrapped tight, eyes misty. Calder said nothing, just looked at the names, then at the girl. The wind brushed past the porch. Somewhere deep in the pines, a bird called, and Peach smiled like she'd just built something no storm could tear down. Spring didn't come all at once. It crept in slow, softening the earth 1 inch at a time. The trees near the creek budded first. Then came the dandelions, stubborn and yellow. The cabin smelled of damp wood and something new. Hope, maybe, or just the fresh air rolling in through an open window. Mama walked without the cane now, still slow but upright. She hummed while she worked. Sometimes she caught Calder watching her and smiled like it didn't scare her anymore to be seen. They planted wildflower seeds in front of the porch. Peach picked each one like it mattered where it landed. Bluebonnet, yarrow, clover. Gotta give the bees a reason to come back, she said. Calder didn't argue, just tilled the soil and handed her the seeds. That night, the three of them sat in the cabin, bellies full of cornbread and laughter. Mama mended a shirt. Calder whittled something small in his lap. Peach leaned against his side, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, fingers still smelling of soil. The fire snapped low. She shifted closer, resting her head on his shoulder. Her voice was soft, softer than it had ever been. Night, Pa. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stilled. Then, without a word, he reached down and tugged the edge of the blanket higher, tucking it under her chin like it was something precious. She was already asleep. Mama watched from across the room, eyes glassed but smiling. Calder didn't meet her gaze. He just looked at the fire, watched it flicker and fade, and sat there, quiet, still and steady, like maybe, just maybe, he'd finally come home.